Hello and welcome to Name on the Trophy, the Manchester United podcast, where we analyse everything that's going on with the club, transfers, and today a little bit different. Well, we're talking about the first two games of the season and also about the Mason Greenwood situation that has come to a head in the past few days. My name is Dominic Booth, and I'm delighted to be joined by a special guest for this one, a guy wanted on podcast for a good while. Simon Lloyd. Si, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Simon's one of the adults in the room on Twitter when it comes to United. I
Oh,
see.
man. Is that right?
I always think so. Well, that'll obviously be put to the test in today's pod as
I'm going to
well.
say, let's see
But
if I can undo that reputation quite quickly.
well, yeah, sometimes it's a pretty low bar anyway. So
Yeah.
we'll see how we go. Yeah, so sort of speaking in a time when it's not really been going too well for United on or off the pitch, has it? It's sort of a little bit, like you said before we came on air, a little bit demoralising and depressing
Mm.
things that are going on around the club at the moment.
To me, the way I look at it all, I remember when I was a kid and the season would start, and obviously I grew up at a time when United were very successful, and I was very, very lucky to have that. But I remember August, you'd just be absolutely buzzing because it was a new season, and you'd have that optimism, wouldn't you? And the last 10 years or so, I'm so sick of just losing that feeling ridiculously quickly. And this year, I think is probably the worst of the lot, mainly because of the off-field stuff and the way the complete circus around that. But yeah, it's that coupled with what happened at Tottenham the other day. It's not been great, has it?
No, we'll get on to Tottenham in a minute. Let's
Mm,
talk about Mason Greenwood because for people who listen to the pod in the past, we haven't touched on Greenwood purely. There's often been legal reasons why we cannot have touched on it, and just the subject matter is wholly unpleasant
yeah.
and distasteful, really. But United obviously made the decision, announced on Monday, that Greenwood, the way they worded it, would be allowed to recommence his career away from Old Trafford. There was a lot of toing and froing on this. The statements that were put out by the club, by Richard Arnold, and by Mason Greenwood all came out on Monday. And I think a lot of credit has to be given to the Athletic's Adam Crafton for his
Mm.
reporting on this. And it seems like he made the club reconsider what they were going to do. It seemed apparent to everybody that they were ready to bring Greenwood back into the fold. Obviously, we don't need to go through the charges and everything that is out there in the public domain about this side. But how did you make? What did you make of United's handling of this? And it did seem, like I said, like they were ready to bring him back. They have arrived at what I believe is the correct decision and what a lot of fans think is the correct decision in making him leave the club, but it didn't seem to come about in the right way, in my opinion.
No, I think you've said it all there, to be honest. I think it is the right decision. But the process through which they've gone through to get it is it's pretty embarrassing, to be honest. I think that the things that have come out from various people that were working within the club, um, it's scary to think. You mentioned there about Adam Crafton in that article and the timing of that. It's a bit scary to think about how things might have panned out had that not been released when it was. Um, which is the thing that rightly people are praising Adam for it because he's been fantastic. Not just on this as well. I think a lot of people are just realizing a lot of his work now and probably coming across it for the first time now. But the last few years, he's been fantastic. The stuff he's done, but what he's done on Greenwood as well, it didn't need to be done, did it? It didn't need to reach a point where um, the club needed to think too hard about this decision, I don't think. And that's what has frustrated, I think, a lot of people that do go to the games that I speak to. I'm aware that I get a lot of my opinions from that circle of people that I know from games and from Twitter too. And Twitter, there is always a danger on Twitter that the nature of it, you follow the people that have similar opinions to yourself. So, there's always a bit of a danger that it's an echo chamber. But to me, it seemed like a no-brainer of a decision to make. Um, I don't know if I look at it differently because I've got a young child. I've got a young boy now who's going to games for like the first few times now. He's been to 4 or 5 already. I'm not saying it's changed my opinion on that, but I think it intensifies what you feel about the situation. And I've been dreading He's 6 now, Ethan, and he's just starting to take an interest in the club and football. And I've been dreading him hearing this and asking the questions about it, because honestly, I didn't really want to have that conversation with him and talk about the whole backstory of it. I wasn't sure how to address that, and it. I'm going to the Forest game this weekend and with him, and I envisage a situation where this news might have been different, the announcement might have been different, and I found myself having to explain that to him, and that's what I really didn't want. And I think that feeling has probably been replicated across a lot of the fan base, for a lot of people who've got young kids who are just starting to go to games, and they were dreading that conversation. I'm glad they got there, but I think obviously the way it's been handled, the length of time, the fact that the Glazer family were happy to delegate it as well. I mean, this isn't really the sort of thing, to my way of thinking, that should need delegating. It should be the sort of thing they can act on themselves. But here we are.
Yeah, I think Adam Crafton said it in that article that a lot of people perceive this as quite representative of how United deal with things under the Glazer regime. That things are delegated and decisions are dithered upon. And we've seen it, obviously, the takeover situation that's rumbling on, and everybody's left in the dark about what's happening there.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't really compare this in terms of the subject matter, but this was something that United could have nipped in the bud earlier. I know Richard Arnold said there were various things about timing, the Women's World Cup, the pre-season tour, effect on the men's and the women's teams that affected the timing. But I see that as sort of pushing the issue down the line a little bit. And, it needed a strong decision to be made. It's obviously not an easy one to make for multiple reasons, but a little bit of decisive, moral, ethical leadership,
Yeah.
I think, was massively lacking.
Yeah, part of me wonders. I mean, I know the issue about the ownership and whether a takeover will now happen is still a bit up in the air. But I do wonder, at the time when the Glazers first announced that they were open to offers, and I can't remember the exact phrasing of this now, if they thought at that time that this Greenwood issue wouldn't be something they'd have to consider themselves, and then it would be dealt with after a takeover had gone through. I don't know. It's the whole thing is a mess. I appreciate there's a lot of things here that the club can't really touch on yet legally, probably. But I think that's a lot where a lot of the frustrations come in, isn't it? I think you've got that statement. I mean, you've obviously read it yourself. It was quite a strange one, and then it seemed to contradict itself in so many ways. And it was essentially saying that we know a lot more than is in the public domain, but we can't really say that. And again, I understand there's legal reasons why they can't do that, but I think that just raises more questions than we've got answers.
Yeah, it just leaves fans in the dark. And I was quite heartened in a way by a lot of fans' reactions. I think that there was quite a lot of mature response to it, even on social media, where you often get that.
Yeah.
So, but we are where we are, I guess. What's interesting is that it comes at a time, and it's probably good to pivot to on-field things, because there's a huge amount of on-field stuff to talk about as well, Si. But it comes at a time where United seem unready for the start of the season, I think is the word I would use.
Yeah.
Unprepared. They look like a team that have just haven't done the preparation, haven't played together in the way that they want to play. And potentially it is symptomatic of the club as a whole, and a summer that's just been distracting, or I don't know what. It just seems like the off-field issues and the on-field issues are mirroring each other in a sense, and the club need to, take a hold of where they are, and Ten Hag needs to take a hold of on-field matters, regardless of what's been going on elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 games, I know obviously everyone's talked about the Wolves game and they got the result, and they were quite fortunate, really, the way they performed for much of the second half. But the thing that's really stood out for me, it just seems like they're just not fit. And obviously, I'm not an expert on that, but to me, like, both games, they've just been so lacking in sharpness. And every time there's a loose ball, it seems like an opposition player's first to it, and it's been quite striking. I think that, as bad as the Spurs game was, I think actually the first half wasn't too bad. I don't think it was awful. Obviously, we've got plenty of examples in the not too distant past where you can think of worse performances than that. But again, it's that this recurred quite a lot last year as well, where they come out at the start of the game or the start of the half, and they're just not up to it at all. And the other team seizes up on that, and I think that's what happened in the first half against Spurs the other day. And they didn't really seem to have much of a response to it. I know they created a chance straight after it, but there was just no sustained period of attacking after that. And as I say, they looked leggy. They just looked slow to the ball. There was no real tempo to the play at all. Not very impressive at all. And I don't think that you can, I've seen some people on Twitter saying that some of the Greenwood stuff may have cast a bit of a shadow over the preparations, and maybe that's what we're seeing in the players' performances. I don't think it's as simple as that, but naturally, a lot of people will have been distracted by this at the club. So perhaps there is some truth to it. I don't know, but I was quite surprised because what we've learned about Ten Hag already is a meticulous planner. And it just seems like, as you just said a moment or two ago there, they're not really as prepared as we would expect them to be.
Yeah, and all those pre-season games, I think there was 8 pre-season games, and I know there's a lot of rotation happens and some of the fringe and youth team players come in and play minutes, but how often those 11 players that Ten Hag had obviously chosen, unchanged both games so far, he obviously knows his first team, he knows his setup, but what is alarming that it just doesn't seem to be a cohesive unit. And you look at the transfer business, I think everyone before the season started, everyone was pretty happy with the transfer business. I think Andre Onana is a really good addition in goal. I think, give him time. Obviously, he made that little bit of an error against Wolves, but could have conceded a penalty. Otherwise, I think he's been good.
What did you think about that penalty thing and the fuss that was generated over it?
I thought that it was a penalty. But I don't actually think that the VAR was wrong not to overturn it. I know that might cause a little bit of a stir. People saying it was an absolute stone wall penalty. I think it happens a lot where the keeper touches someone and people think it just automatically has to be a foul and a penalty.
Yeah.
And he didn't actually take out the person that had headed the ball, did he?
No, and he made contact with the guy after the ball had been headed as well. So that's why I think it was a bit contentious, really.
And United had a big shout against Spurs for a handball, which I just assumed would have been given against Romero, because it always is. It was a bit like the one in the Women's World Cup final, actually, with Kira Walsh.
Yeah.
And I knew that was going to be given, and I really thought the Romero one would be.
Yeah, I think you look at where Romero's hands are as well. Like, they are very definitely up and about. I can never keep pace with the rule changes on handball, to be quite honest with you. So I'm always a bit mindful about putting these things on Twitter and stuff, because you'll always get somebody who points to real whatever it is and it'll show you up for it. But to me, it just seemed absolutely obvious that he's put his hands up and they're not in a natural position, whatever that means. And the ball seems like it's on its way in as well. So I was just expecting it, but I think that Sky's handling after that was quite strange, really, given that the absolute circus that was generated about the Onana thing. There was no mention of it, and I thought at least at half time there'd be some reference to it. And I did nip out the room briefly, but I didn't see any reference to it on Sky after it, so I just thought it was quite strange. I don't want to say that's the reason they lost the game, because it wasn't, and I don't think you should ever say that. But I thought it quite interesting afterwards, because you had Bruno Fernandes. He was asked about it directly, didn't bring it up himself, and he made the point quite fairly, I thought, about why John Moss and whoever else, whoever was at the game in attendance, referee wise, didn't come into the room and explain why it wasn't given after the game, as was the case at Old Trafford with Wolves of the week. And I do think it's absolutely mad. It's inevitable that it will happen, because you and I both know, we've worked in media, that United will generate clicks and they'll generate opinions, and that is ultimately what drives it. But it is absolutely ridiculous when you look at the contrasting reactions to both of those incidents.
Yeah, and the biggest story is always if United have underperformed, if United look a mess. Question 100%. United's transfer business, question Ten Hag's tactical setup of the team. What do you make of that tactical setup? There's a lot of talk about the midfield at the moment, the signing of Mason Mount, the balance in that midfield three. I think it's been pretty apparent that Casemiro is getting exposed, that he needs help. What do you think?
With Casemiro as well, I think we're probably right to say that with the Wolves game particularly, that he did look a bit isolated at times. It was just frankly too easy that Wolves just cut through that midfield like they did. I think what I think is the case with Casemiro. I'm basing this mainly on one season, so maybe I'm going too early on this. But it seemed to me last year he took 3 or 4 games to warm up at the start of the season, and he looked a little bit leggy the first couple of games I saw him play. And I think that obviously by Christmas time he was fantastic. He was the main reason United did what they did last year in terms of getting where they did in the league and winning the League Cup. He was superb. I think that he needs that rhythm of games, Casemiro. He seems to be. Anyway, I think that the fact he got that suspension and a couple of suspensions after that, and I think that really disrupted him. I'm not seeing, as you said before, it doesn't quite look right in midfield at the minute with Mount and Bruno next to as well. I'm not quite sure that's working at this moment in time. I think what it does shine a light on, and this is not me saying that I was too disappointed to see him leave, but it shines a light on why they chose to let Fred go when they have done. I'll put my cards on the table. I was never like Fred's biggest fan, but I appreciate that he did bring a bit of energy to midfield. And although he wasn't always brilliant on the ball in terms of his passing, I think that what he gave off it in terms of hassling people was quite useful. And I think they at second half, it was almost the change that they could have done with making, if you get what I mean, just to kind of like give a little bit more energy in midfield. It probably bodes well for Kobbie Mainoo, which sounds ridiculous, but his injury, I think, is very unfortunate because I think that he would have actually be getting quite a few minutes at this moment in time. I think that Ten Hag probably had that in his plans. I still think he's looking to strengthen in that department, but I would imagine a lot of playing time would have been given to Kobbie Mainoo as well, and I think that he's more than capable of having that now. I think that's where we're up to now. But yeah, it's very worrying given that it's a new season and they just don't look ready for it.
I've made that Fred point to friends and been laughed out of the room, but I actually think that I think it was a bit of a strange decision to let him go before getting someone in, someone like an Amrabat, or I see Gravenberch is the latest to be linked to United in that position. There's a whole heap of midfield players that keep getting linked, but this is United have made a big addition in midfield and they've let someone go in midfield, and yet major surgery is apparently still required. But I know I think the Casemiro point is a good one, but I do think United are sometimes asking him to perform miracles in there. And he's wrong side of 30, all that jazz. I know he's an unbelievable player and he was fantastic last year. You got to say that, but you even got to get into the point where I think, should he bring on Scott McTominay here just to plug a gap? Should he change Mount's position or something like that just to change the balance in there? It's going to be interesting. Like you say, maybe Casemiro will get to the pace of things and United can find that balance in there. It's early days to be going fully in on this team. But like we said at the top, with the off-field stuff proving a potential distraction, and the way they started last season was even more shambolic, wasn't it? So
3 points better off, mate. I don't know what all the fuss is about.
There are caveats to all of this, aren't they? They haven't lost 4-0 at Brentford. Yeah, that's for sure. So it's just where they go from here now. There's got to be stark improvement now, hasn't it? You'd like to see transfer business get done, a couple of performances to seriously sort of boost morale around the club, and we could potentially talk in a very different way, couldn't we?
Massively. It's always the way as well at the start of a season when United lose any game for the first time. There's always a massive deal made out of it in the press. I do think there was that time, wasn't there, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where everyone's like, "Oh, this is quietly brilliant. This from United," in that they've actually got a few players in, they're getting rid of players, and then things seem to like go a little bit wayward with it. There was talk about Maguire going, that seems to have hit the buffers now. There was talk about McTominay potentially going. I personally think, although I've just said that there about Fred, I think McTominay is a player worth keeping. Not necessarily the start every week. I think there's no harm in keeping him where he is. But I think the glaringly obvious place where they need something, and the Spurs game really highlighted this, was up front. I mean, you cannot, I know they've got Højlund in, but they cannot seriously be thinking about being a team that will actually challenge for the title without more reinforcements there. Now, I'm not saying I've got an answer to this because, I think that the Harry Kane thing, the club were quite clear from early on they weren't going to go for that. But it seems to me a lot to ask of Højlund. Good though I think he'll be, to shoulder all that burden of scoring the majority of the goals, if that's what they're expecting of him. I think they need somebody else in that department. Who that is, I don't know. But I think that is the glaze you saw against Spurs. There's just no cutting edge when they need one. They need someone who can actually take on that number 9 role properly and not just rely on playing on the counter.
It's just impossible, isn't it,
Yeah.
to look at the market, to look at the options, to look at the fact United spent £64 million plus add-ons on, a guy who's very untested, although has potential in Højlund. And then you don't come to any sort of answer on the striker hunt. It doesn't look
only
like
there
it
was
can
a
go
big
anywhere.
30-odd-year-old Dutch player who'd been at Burnley, and you could just call on him. But it's weird. I think that obviously people talk about this, don't they, in the lack of a centre forward nowadays. Haaland is obviously brilliant, but he's so unique now, and there's no player like him. His attributes at all, they're pretty much unmatched by a lot of people now. And that's what United really need at this moment in time. And do you know, honestly, if you look at that team, they could stick some like Danny Ings in there up top. And he would almost make a difference. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that United should go and get Danny Ings, but I'm just saying that caliber of player, that type of player who can, just be a bit of a nuisance in there as well and knows how to play number 9 is what they really need at this moment in time. Not saying to start every game, because obviously it's horses for courses, isn't it? But I think that's what they need. And unfortunately, it's not looking like they're going to get anybody else in for that area.
No, the Harry Kane thing was the big one that I think that it was never going to happen as much as fans wanted it to.
No.
I banged the drum for that. I thought it was worth just shelling out the money and gambling on Harry Kane, because he might have actually won you the league, or got you very, very close to winning the league, even if he's only there for 2 or 3 years. They haven't gone down that route, but it now looks like the wait for a title challenge, if it's just going to be Højlund, is going to be longer, because Marcus Rashford isn't going to adapt to playing that position anytime soon. I think we finally need to knock that experiment on the head, really.
It's almost as if the club have been planning to bring back a certain forward at some point who now, given recent events, is no longer going to be part of the setup. I don't know. I wonder if that might have shaped a lot of the transfer plans this year and where money's gone.
Yeah, that's been a thought in the back of my head. I'm
not saying he'd have been ready straight away, but when fit, I think that might have had an influence on where other money's been spent.
Yeah, I mean, Greenwood hasn't played football for 18 months. No one knows what sort of a state he's going to return to playing when he does, because he will return to playing for somebody now, won't he? Like you said at the top, it was always a decision that was influenced by so many other things. But I think that Athletic report mentioned that Ten Hag and John Murtough, who are in charge of the football side of things at United, were both open to his return. That ties into what you're saying, I think. I don't think you can come to any other conclusion other than that played a role in making the plans for the striker signing this summer.
Yeah.
It's not good, is it?
It's not. It's really depressed me, mate. I think, I'm looking forward to going to the game at the weekend, but at the same time, like, there's so much like clouding the club at this moment in time as well. You can't really fully enjoy it as much as you would do normally. And that's the issue, isn't it? I think that a lot of people follow a football club because it's a great way of shutting out everything else in life that's miserable, even when the results aren't great. But, when you get a series of events like we've had the last couple of weeks and stuff, it's quite hard to enjoy it, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't go to the Wolves game, and I'm not going to the Forest game. And I'm not too gutted about that. I went a heck of a lot last season, but I'm not too gutted about that, to be honest, at the moment. It's just things doesn't feel like an enjoyable experience to watch Manchester United. Not that it has been in recent years, but I look back at the Solskjaer era, and Solskjaer had a huge amount of faults as a manager.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of fun in what United were doing, at least on the pitch then. They were chaotic, they were tactically inept at times, they were too easily cut open, but
you felt they'd have a goal though.
Yeah, they were kind of entertaining to watch, weren't they? And they had a lot of goals in them.
That first spell when he first came back in, and obviously it was quite easy to do after the Mourinho stuff, but I remember being at the Bournemouth game in the press box for that, and United were brilliant that day. Like, it was just like a throwback to some of the best days under Ferguson. You knew at the same time it was never going to last, the intensity they were playing at. But it was great to watch at times for about what 6 or 7 weeks. It was perfect. But then
Yeah.
things, I can't believe we're reminiscing about this. Things must be
No,
bleak if
yeah.
we're talking about the Solskjaer era fondly. There we go.
Yeah. Well, it's two United fans who grew up with the good times being too good.
Yeah.
Which brings me on to the subject of your book, Simon, which I know you
Yeah.
want to talk about, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about. United with Dad is the title, which I am sure will speak a lot to a lot of fans. Just that title is quite nostalgic in a sense.
Yeah, so it's been released. It's been out from the start of the month in Waterstones and Amazon, all usual places. But it's about my late father. My dad passed away coming up to 4 years ago now, and he was the person that basically I went to United with. And the book does a lot of things. It talks a lot about that, but it also draws on the last 2 years of his life because he died with prostate cancer. That was the thing, that metastatic prostate cancer eventually was the reason he died. But he also lived with dementia for the last 2 years of his life too, or for a large spell of that, which complicated a lot of things. And the thing that kind of kept our relationship through a lot of my life really was United, just being able to talk about United, even at spells when I was in my teens and those awkward years where you don't always see eye to eye with your parents. We always had United as a way of, like, wiping the slate clean and getting on with each other. But towards the end, it kind of took on a different meaning in that it was at United, at games where I'd noticed the change in him that eventually we saw as being dementia. And towards the end of his life, when he was in a nursing home, we'd have that conversation about United. And that was kind of very often the only time we'd be able to have a conversation, which quite emotional. So it's a book about grief. It's a book about the relationship we have with our football clubs and why they matter to us so much, and why relationships with other people are pinned on that, if you get what I mean. So I talk about the last 2 years of his life, how that all came to be. Talk about his life too, because my dad, he first started going to Old Trafford in the 50s when he was a young lad, before Munich. Absolutely obsessed with Duncan Edwards, and would go to the bus stop up on Warwick Road and wait for. Well, Duncan lived nearby, didn't he? He lived in one of the digs nearby, and he would wait for other teammates to get up at the bus stop there. My dad found this out, and every match day, from my dad being about 10, when he was able to get to Old Trafford on his own, he'd wait at the bus stop before Duncan just to be in his presence. Never really spoke to him, but he would be there. So the book talks about his life and how basically United have always been there, the ebbs and flows of being a football fan, really. And obviously how our relationship with each other was built so much on going to United. And then it ends with basically me and my little lad going to his first game, and that cycle maybe starting again. So yeah,
great.
so it's out in the shops now, and been really, really pleased with the early responses to it, because it was not the easiest thing you can probably imagine to write.
No, yeah, but I guess from the heart and the emotion of football is emotion, and it is family for so many people, isn't it? And
Yeah,
that sort of habitual nature of it. Yeah, I first went to United with my dad, and I'm sure many listeners
yeah.
and many readers of the book will know that feeling. So that's yeah, I look forward to reading it actually.
Thanks very much, mate. Yeah, I'm glad it's done. It was, like I say, it wasn't the easiest thing to do, but it was quite a nice moment the other day. We went into Waterstones near us, and we saw it in the shop there, and my little lad just couldn't believe that I'd written a book, and his name was in the back of it basically, because the last chapter's all about him. So it was quite a nice moment. So yeah, looking forward to taking to the Forest game on Saturday, hopefully without all the other stuff in the background spilling over now.
Yeah, it might be a nice one. Might be a nice one too. And I'm glad we finished on this note. Actually, it's a much
Yeah.
nicer note after all the
Slightly more positive,
after all the stuff we've been talking about. You're speaking here to a veteran of one book, but that was a bit. It was about Neil Warnock and Cardiff City, the only book that I've written. So not quite as emotional, but
I don't know, eh? I don't know.
a labour of love.
Probably harder to write.
Well, no, it was easy to write, to be honest. I'm sure it didn't. It certainly didn't take the emotion out of me in the same way, but no, it was when I was a journalist down in Cardiff covering Warnock's spell down there, and
Yeah.
the relationship I actually had with him, which was nice, which finished ironically with that 2-0 win over Solskjaer's United at the end of the season.
Yes,
So
that game well, yeah.
yeah, full
That
circle.
game, weirdly, was the last game I went to as a season ticket holder. I mentioned that in the book. That's why I remember it so vividly, because quite a strange afternoon because it was all the focus was on Brighton, City, and Liverpool, whoever they were playing for the title, wasn't it? So it was a bit of a
Yeah.
weird afternoon. That, yeah, good
Well,
stuff.
that's great. Thank you, Simon. So much appreciate you coming on. You've been on a little notebook of mine, a list of eminent United people on Twitter that I'd like to get on the podcast. So
Right.
finally tick that one off. Thanks very much.
Hopefully, I've not tarnished my reputation too much there.
No, we'll get you back on for sure.
Good stuff.
And yeah, United with Dad by Simon Lloyd is out in all the usual book places, Amazon and Waterstones. And thanks all for listening to this episode of Name on the Trophy. We're on Spotify, Apple, and you can also get clips of us on YouTube. Simon, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, mate.
I'll speak to you all again soon. Cheers.